Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, the Keep It Simple podcast. Thanks for joining us for episode 29. This evening we are joined by a longtime friend, Matthew Simpson. Matthew and I have known one another for, I don't even know how long dang time. And he is living in downtown Atlanta, right smack dab in the middle of downtown Atlanta, and is currently serving as a project manager for a construction company there. And they do big projects. Sounds like a lot of hospitals from the slab up work. So interested to hear more about that, catch up with Matthew. I'm super stoked for you all to meet him and hear his story. Very much look forward to the conversation. Matthew, welcome to the podcast.
Well, yeah, it's good to be on. I've listened to a bunch of these, and it's been really fun hearing old friends and I guess some new people that you've met along the way. Anyway, yeah, I guess like you were saying, I've been out of college for right about a year now. Graduated high school in 2019. COVID happened. The whole thing was a blur. College happened. That was a blur for various reasons. So yeah, I graduated, left Georgia Tech, couldn't quite leave Atlanta, stuck around doing construction project management, and here we are. I guess to give the backstory, I was raised in church. The church was a big part of growing up for me. There's a lot of interconnectedness between my family and several families in the church we attended. But I suppose that all kind of fell away in college. The COVID didn't help, but neither did college. And I think that's a pretty common trend. We were talking about that, I think, briefly before we started recording. You said something like 80% of some odd high schoolers who go to church don't come back to church, and 30% come back after their first kids, something like that. So yep. I think I pretty squarely, at least at the moment, fall under the 80%. Not really for lack of trying. I think one thing that we haven't really talked about, maybe we've texted about it, is how there's a huge disconnect maybe between the church I was raised in and churches around me in Atlanta that young people attend, even the Wesley groups in college. It's very strange. I went to a just as an example, I went to a church a couple months ago with a buddy, and this place, I kid you not, had like a water fountain, like a waterfall behind the altar that glowed. It had lights behind it. It was recessed. It was very, very bizarre, right? But that kind of maybe encapsulates my experience with church in Atlanta, and not even to get into all the other questionable ideology and theology. It's been a ride, and so as a result of that, I haven't really found a place. I've been kind of unplugged since college.
Yeah, and that, to visit around, that's a common theme, as we've talked to a lot of y'all that came through our programs and ended up in college. Some landed with college ministry, some did not. When you come, especially from a very traditional setting, so First Church, obviously traditional. Our student ministry was really we didn't have a lot of bells and whistles or fluff, and we weren't very entertaining, to be quite honest with you. We tripled down on relationship and really focused on communicating the word, and served and loved people. So yeah, I think we are all products of our environment, and so what is our baseline or norm could very well be light years apart from somebody else's. Neither is more right or wrong, I would say. It's just what's the norm. And going back to this tie to family and families, but really family off camera before I hit record, you were telling me kind of your heart and hope for our conversation, and coming from a family. I have the great good fortune of knowing your family very well, very, very well, and consider you all real friends. But is there weight? Is there pressure? Coming from a family that is faithful, genuinely, sincerely practitioners of the Christian faith. What was that like growing up? Was church an option? Was it not? What effect did that have then when you did get the taste of freedom and out on your own? I guess that would be a really, really good place to start.
Yeah, so I think one thing I heard, especially in college, being in such a secular environment, surrounded by people who are more likely to be atheist, agnostic, than maybe the demographic of high school, was I think a lot of people did feel that pressure, to attend services with their family because it's what you did, it's what you do.
Yeah.
I don't know that was ever my case, and I think it might be a bit unique in the sense that I always liked going to church as a kid. I had, I think, like we were saying, the Asbells, the Staffords, Mellingers, Landrets, a lot of families who were close to ours, interconnected. So
Westrays.
Yes, yeah, the Westrays. I'd say that even very early on, it was always sort of the third place that we talk about. Somewhere you go and are connected, and it's not. There wasn't ever really a sense of obligation. Or maybe there was, I don't remember when I was like 4, right? I'm sure that there were other things I wanted to do, but definitely by the time I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, certainly by the time I was driving, it was definitely a habit and something I wanted to do. And, I'm sure there were days I didn't want to go, and I did go because it was a habit. So that's how those things typically go. It's like going to the gym, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that there was any pressure from family or not to keep up appearances or stuff like that. I think if there was any pressure, you could call it positive peer pressure. Especially, I don't know. I think I've probably always been a very, I don't know that introspective or thoughtful is the right word, but I've always had a great deal of respect for like the effort I think my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents put into getting us to the situation we're at today.
Sure.
I think there is an element of not wanting to let those people down. And if going to church was part of that, then sure, I suppose there was a little bit of pressure, but I don't know that I ever felt it that way. But then I guess to answer the second part of your question, went off to college, and I don't know. I don't know that there was any sort of, like I'm not, nobody's around here. I'll go, be wild, do whatever. I think it was more so that you can fall out of a habit, especially during COVID. COVID happened, and I think it wasn't just college-age kids, but a lot of people fell out of the habit of going to church. And I don't know, you could probably be as well connected as anybody, and if you don't see people for 8 or 10 or 12 months or however long it was, something's going to take the place of that. And one thing I do know that's true, that and I think I have learned the hard way, is you make time for what you want to make time for, and all your time and all your days gets filled up one way or another, and it's up to you to determine how you fill it. And so I think a lot of people, me in my case in particular, maybe not, some of them never had to fill that hole on Sundays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, wherever you go, whenever you go. They never had to intentionally fill that hole. Then COVID happens and everything falls apart, and so things take that place, and now you got to build the habit. And I think, I failed with that. I think a lot of people fail with that. But so that's another reason why I think during college it fell away. And Of course, COVID's kind of the cop-out, right? Everybody had COVID. There were definitely elements of, there was other things I wanted to do on the weekend to go to church. That's a pretty universal experience, I think. And a third reason also, I think we hit on a little bit already, was I just was very unprepared for the type of churches I'd be around. And they didn't sit well with me. They still don't sit well with me, partly because I am probably a very traditional person. I like a traditional service. I like a traditional message. I just resonate with it. And there's not a lot of that around here, at least not that I've seen. And so it's hard to get plugged in. But I guess again, if you really want to, you put the effort in and make it worth it. But it's hard to put that initial effort in if things don't, I guess, vibe, right?
Yeah, and there's this common misconception that a church or a service can't be traditional and relevant, and that's, here in the context where we are now, where our family's serving and where we worship. It's been a 4-year sample size that a traditional context and relevancy are not mutually exclusive. Like, you can be traditional and be relevant, and it does take intentionality, for sure. But that So before we came on, you said that you are resolute in your Christian faith, right? So you are just as your words were. I'm just as solid in my belief systems, in my Christian faith, as I am about gravity holding me to the planet, right? So it's not a doubt if God exists, if Jesus, was born, walked the earth, was crucified, dead, buried, resurrected. Not the salvific nature of the Christian faith. It is the organization of the church. Is that what you've grown disenchanted with? Let's talk about that a little bit. Like, so how much of it was in your family of origin, you were expected to attend church, so you did, and then you didn't have to or weren't expected to, so there was freedom. Yeah, there was COVID. But I know a lot of people that continued to worship right on through COVID. And how much of it was just, you desired to do other things on your Sunday. Let's talk through that a little bit, because I can assure you there are a lot of people who will listen to this that are saying, that's me. Like, you're telling my story.
Well, tragically, maybe. I think we broke up a little bit there. Can you repeat the question? I got the part right up until you mentioned, there was COVID, and a lot of people kept worshiping during COVID.
So just the disconnect with organized religion with the church, depends on how you want to phrase that, or semantics are semantics. But so you're not disenchanted with the Christian faith or with God or Christ or the Spirit of God working in you and through you. It doesn't sound like. It sounds like where the disconnect is with the organized part or piece, with the church piece. Is that fair? Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Like you were saying, I hope people don't take that the wrong way, the comparison of faith to gravity. But sure. I think it does convey pretty well. Like, I know God exists. It's just fact. It's fact, right? Like, it's not something I ever doubted. And we could go into whether or not what's the challenges, where are the trials and temptations that might shake that. But yeah, I think that part's never been in question. And then going to church, I think especially what we did all those years. Back up through high school with the student ministry, we had a really something special going on there, as far as connecting the spiritual aspects of church and the social aspects of the teenage years, and there was a really special mix of I guess reality going on there, of authenticity. That was the word that was always used. And it's hard. I don't know if it's because you become maybe more aware, more you perceive more maybe what others think as you get older, as you get it to like you're 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 25, maybe care and are a little bit more perceptive on how people think and how the optics of certain things are. But it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to make those connections that seem to come so easily when we were younger. And I'm sure we can say that there's an element of God's blessing in that time with the Scarlet Movement and the beginning of, I guess, the Simplify Project. But I don't know. I think it's hard after experiencing something like that, both growing up in the church and that youth group. It's hard to start over with people you don't know, who at least initially don't appear real or authentic, genuine, whatever adjective you want to use. It's hard to put the effort in to make those connections. Maybe that's the big thing. I think if you throw people together long enough, eventually they'll be friends with each other. Maybe I don't give people enough chance of that at church. Maybe that's one reason. Maybe it's also true that people maybe care a little bit too much about what the rest of the congregation thinks of them, and it becomes some sort of feedback loop where everybody becomes perfect. I don't know. Probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I am on a different, I guess, wavelength or experience. Being in ministry as a vocation, it's been a long time since I've stepped into a church in a parishioner role, and so I can't relate to that. I mean, I don't know what Connor and I talked about that. I can't remember if it was on his episode or not. I hope it was.
I watched that.
But we talked about how hard it is to visit churches, how hard it is to find a place to connect. And I mean, you're talking about people of high character, sincere faith, who are spiritually mature and are still trying to work through these processes to find a place, because I'm just as convinced now as I've ever been that corporate worship is an integral part of our faith. Now, a lot of what the church in the Western world has become, I'm not so sure about. But the gathering together for corporate worship it's an integral part of our belief system, of our structures, and it's so I always, and always is a big word. I try not to use always and never very often, but I always encourage people to continue trying to find somewhere to connect so that you have that sense of community. But it's the authenticity that's at times is difficult. But I've said this a ton, and it's because I believe it. You all are the generation that swings that pendulum back. And the more of you who are disconnected, the slower the pendulum swings. But it's your generation that brings my generation and the one ahead of me back to this center place of authenticity that's, no longer the do as I say, not as I do stuff, but the slushing off all the other junk and getting right down to the brass tacks.
Yeah. And I think it's still there. That's the funny thing. I got some sort of a story that happened to me just last week. It's funny we're doing this. Just maybe as an example of how corporate worship and regular Joes sometimes intersect. So I visited a warehouse where we buy all of our piping, our steel pipes at work. Everything from 1.5-inch copper all the way to big 30-inch cast iron elbows. This warehouse is where it gets shipped, where we receive it and get it out to our jobs. And another project manager went with me who's, I don't know, he's probably 35, 40 maybe, 36, 37, something like that. And then this old timer who's been doing it for 30 years. Was the third member of our little group, and so we go and we tour this factory or warehouse. My bad. We tour this warehouse, and it goes great. We get our little hats and things, the gift bag of thanks for using us, whatever. And so it's been a couple hours. We got there at 11. It was probably 1:30 at this point, and we get out, and the other project manager goes, "Man, I'm really hungry," and this old timer goes, "Oh yeah, me too. Where do you guys want to go?" And we're like, "Well, yeah, we can go eat somewhere, but we're not really around here very often. What's good?" He goes, "Oh, don't worry about it. Just follow me, and we'll go get something good to eat." And so we go up the interstate an exit or two, and then he gets off, and there's a strip of restaurants. We go down, and it just so happens that he wants to go to Hooters.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Okay.
So during work, so we go. We sit there, and I find myself with my 20 count of breaded chicken wings with the hot buffalo sauce, and sitting with this 60-year-old and this guy who's 34, 35, who's sort of my mentor at work. We're at Hooters eating wings, and I think, wow, this is bizarre. But so the wings get there, and I'm like, okay, great, let's just eat. Let's get out of here, right?
Yeah.
But they go, hey, do you guys want to pray? The old guy wanted to go to Hooters, and so we did. We said our prayer, blessed the food, and dig in. And we were there probably, for 45 minutes or an hour, however long it takes you to eat 60 wings between three guys. And I swear, the entire conversation, this actually happened, the entire conversation was about the Bible. We started with this older guy. I don't know how the conversation actually started, but he started talking about how he was divorced, and he prayed for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks about, whether he was able to get remarried, whether he should get remarried. And he studied the Bible, he studied the whole law, and worked through all that. And so maybe that's where the conversation started. But we talked about Job. We talked about the disciples and casting the net on the other side. There's a bunch of random things that weren't really connected at all, but beyond, I guess, what was on people's minds about the Bible. And I don't know how or why that happened, but it did, in a strange place. But maybe that's your example, and I think that stuff like that happens, and it's inspiring, not because of the location or anything, but just because there's people out there who you wouldn't expect care about their faith, who do deeply more than we think. And that was amazing to me.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That makes me think about my friend Andy Backus.
Something like that. I don't know that I've experienced something like that in church.
Oh.
Yeah. Recently, not recently.
Like a scantily clad woman traipsing around with beer mugs,
no, just like the sort of,
or just the authenticity of a conversation about divorce.
The not caring, the who. I don't know, what type of person do you have to be to go to Hooters during work and then talk about the Bible? It was strange, but it was such a good way. Maybe
I would have to think about that. Yeah.
Maybe you'll maybe something can come from it, but it really was strange, and it was the first time in a while that I'd heard people talk about what they thought of the Bible and how they were studying it. And it came from Hooters.
Makes me think about my friend Andy Backus, who's in construction, big construction like you're talking about down in Macon, and he actually, from an encounter, it wasn't in a Hooters, but from an encounter like that, started a very impromptu, relatively informal Bible study with the workers, and no strings attached, just kind of do drop in, no prep ahead of time, everybody's welcome, just open conversation to lob questions and thoughts out there. Maybe you could do something like that. That would be for a weirdo like me, that would be exciting. because you remember back in the day we'd talk about ghetto passes, right? So you got a ghetto pass. You are in that environment, and you are considered to be one of them. And so they may or may not listen to you, where they wouldn't give a guy like me 30 seconds, because I'm not a made man. I'm not in that circle. So anyway, yeah. So do you miss church? I mean, do you miss corporate worship? Do you miss church?
That's a good question. I do. I think I miss. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. I think we froze again. No, I do. Do I miss church?
Yeah.
I do. So I miss the community of it, because you can't. You can try to replace those relationships, but I don't know that you do. You know, I was thinking the other day, just because I saw him at Easter, I saw Stephen Landreth. I was thinking about that. We spent a fair good bit of time together when we were in school, from a Christian relational standpoint, going over the Bible, helping each other. It was a good thing that probably stands alone in my experience so far, and you can try and replicate that. Like, I met a lot of really great people in college who I could keep up with, and you know, we talk about anything and everything and what's going on, what we want to be going on that isn't. But you can't replace that spiritual maybe undergirding of that relationship. So I miss that part a lot. But I guess it kind of circles back to it's hard to find a place where that is cultivated.
Yeah, but you can't find it if you don't put yourself out there. I mean, the Stephen Landreths, the Matthew Simpsons. I mean, that or Matt. I guess you go by Matt now. The Matt Simpsons. Those are the ones that are needed. And if those of you go give a place a chance, and then you're like, oh no, this isn't for me, I'm done. Enough of that, and then what's created really is an echo chamber. It does lack some of that. So I would encourage you to try, try to connect somewhere, because I can assure you, they need you, and you need them. Maybe they need you to challenge them. Or maybe they just need your gifts and graces in the room, and likewise you need them. So you were telling me you've gotten into sailing. That blows my mind, man.
Yeah,
let's talk about sailing a little bit.
And I guess that's sorry. I just want to make sure I want to follow up on that. We froze again. No, I did in college, because there was not a fishing club. I joined the sailing club at Georgia Tech as a way to get out on various bodies of water, even if it wasn't with a rod and reel. So I started doing that, and I happened upon a really interesting group of people, a great, really good group of 3 or 4 guys who. I don't know, we started going to these local races and regional races together, and we've kept doing it since I graduated. And I think, at least for a little while there, it just happens that most of these big races they're sort of like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday things. And so we spend a lot of weekends together and traveling together. You get to know people pretty quick, I think. If you're sitting in a truck with them towing a boat across the country, you know, you learn what makes people pissed off, and you know, how they think about things, and you know, it's just interesting, the exposure you get to people. But that sort of evolved, and they are very close friends, and like I said, I think we can talk about anything and do anything together. But it's not the same. It's not the same as a relationship or friendships rooted in faith. It's just not. And I think we could definitely, you know, circle it back around, we definitely talked about religion a lot. You know, midnight on the way back from Annapolis or whenever it was. But those friendships weren't ever rooted in it, and I'm sure, like I said, they could evolve to do that, but they don't, and they're a good replacement, but they are a replacement.
Yeah.
That and like I think I told you a couple minutes ago, I do feel that it's sort of a facsimile, like at the peaks of it, when everything's going great. I don't know that I think they do replace church, but they don't. Not when things are bad. Not when things are not so good. Like not that they're bad guys or that they're not, they're going to leave me out to dry or anything, but there's different experiences that happen in church, in a body of faith, that aren't replicated anywhere else. They're not. I guess I should say they can be replicated, but they can't, or imitated, not replicated. There, that's, and so, I think I did try that. That did get me, it got me connected with people, good people. I was very fortunate in that regard. But I do see how, suppose people fall into hobbies or groups, or not hobbies, just they fall in with people that maybe aren't so great. Not bad guys, but don't, you can fall. I can see how it happens that you fall sort of away and never make it back to church, just by virtue of being drug away. And by the time maybe you realize that you've been gone for 20 years, and it becomes much harder to come back. I don't know really where we wanted to go with that, but
yeah, no, I had two thoughts in it, actually. The first is a telltale sign is where people go in crisis. People in the high cotton, in the mountain peaks, they can do all the things they want to do. But when the shit hits the fan, when the crisis hits, and I'm not talking about like a girlfriend breaking up with you, I'm talking about a cancer diagnosis or an unexpected car crash that takes the life of a person, and it rips your guts out, spikes them on the concrete and stomps on them. In those moments of crisis, in my opinion, is where people who practice the Christian faith are differentiated. There is a divide there in the crisis. So that's one thought. The other thought is, that was pretty intense. The other thought is much less intense, but it's nonetheless very, very true. So this gradual drag away, specifically in the college and early career age, is also the time where most people meet their mates. And I've spent a lot of time telling my boys, to the point that now they roll their eyes at me, but I still tell them because I love them. Who we choose as our mate, outside of our decision to accept Christ as our Savior, who we choose as our mate is the most important decision we make. It literally, outside of a decision to accept Christ, it literally determines the rest of our lives. It determines the home that we establish, our offspring, and the genealogy that flows downstream. And people who are in your age and stage and phase of life, and I'm not talking about you, because you are very, very logical. You always have been, as long as I've known you, since you were little. You think very logically. You're a black and white thinker in a lot of ways, but that's not the norm. And a lot of people your age, they don't stop to consider the enormity in the selection process of a mate. So yeah, crisis a lot of times will bring people full circle back into relationship with the church, and then a spouse. It's like Stephen was saying, and I think about like Sarah Brown or Danny Aiken, who was Danny Brown back then, other dear friends who are female who were single or are single, who are looking for that integrity and the sincerity and the Christian faith in their spouse. It's easier for guys, it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, it's easier for guys to find that in a woman than it is for a girl to find that in a man. And it's so to Stephen's point, not to put you on the hook, but to Stephen's point, he's looking around, he's going to two different churches out there in the Pacific Northwest, and he's looking around and he's like, where are all the single guys at? Did you hear him say that? Yeah. And like his mentor or whoever it is that he's in relationship with is like, you're the guy. Like, that's you. You are that guy. So maybe, just maybe, there's a whole herd of y'all scattered abroad. And certainly there would be safety in numbers. So yeah, that's my two thoughts in that part or piece. Yeah, you do have these relationships. You do have, friends, sincere friends who are incredible people. But when you take the Christian faith thread out of the blanket, the two thoughts that I had while you were kind of talking through that was, one, what about crisis? And then the other, what about a mate when it comes to a spouse and a home and children, grandchildren, right on down the line. So what do you think about that?
I think you're right. I feel like this is a conversation that my mom tries to bring up a lot. But
oh wow, thanks.
No, but you are right. It is weird. I do think. I don't want to throw a number on it, but I bet it's 3-1. It might even be 4-1. The ratio of men to women my age in church in favor of the women. And I've never asked anybody why that is. Probably the only reason I could even suggest is that I think, especially in college, maybe men have a tendency to try and hit it out on their own. I think part of that's maybe growing up a little bit, but the strong desire of wanting to be able to do things that you've never done before with people that you don't know, and do something different. I'm sure it's a universal experience, but I think particularly among a lot of my male friends, that's a pretty strong drive, and it could be a reason that we do run away from church, and I guess it might make us think of what was the book, Wild at Heart?
Oh yeah, John Eldridge, man. Yeah, and his wife Stacy wrote Captivating. That's the lady's mate to the book Wild at Heart. I still read that book once a year. It's one of only 2 books I read every year. Every year there are 2 books that I read, and that's one of them. So gosh, this might get me in trouble. So how many times in churches or in families, you may not be aware of this or just oblivious to it, I'm not sure, but more often than not, in churches and families that I've been around and done life with, growing up and just observation through the years, the mom is the spiritual force in the home. You had the great good fortune of having a balance in that. I love your dad, always have, and have a crap ton of respect for that guy. He's my friend, but he's a little bit of an anomaly. And so my point in saying that is, like, when you look at the Christian church in the West right now, when you look at the condition that she's in, and the way that she's trending, you can run a parallel to the condition of the North American church and the lack of men stepping in to lead, both individually in their home, but corporately in the church. So when you look at committees or these different leadership teams, whatever the structure is, lots of ladies volunteering, lots of ladies pouring in, lots of ladies stepping into those roles. And don't misunderstand me, I'm not against that at all. I know some women who are freaking otherworldly and have the giftings and graces to kick doors down. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, what about the 20-something guys, and the gap that's growing, and it is growing, the gap that's growing. It's easy to step back and look at the condition of the North American church and say, "Oh my gosh, what a dumpster fire." It's an entirely different thing to get in the game. You know what I mean? To step in there and say, "Okay, I choose to be part of the solution." And I'm not even talking about like going backwards, like my friend Sadell Bradley said a few months ago. This was an aha moment for me, Matt. I was sitting around this table. Kind of in a think tank setting with people that I trust, and we were talking about the condition of the church, the American church, and lamenting a little bit about the bride of Christ. And what I said was, there's got to be a way to right the ship. Like, there's got to be a way to right the ship. We can't give up. We got to keep working. And what my friend Sadell Bradley said, man, it caught me so off guard. But she was right. She looked at me and she said, therein lies the problem. It's no longer a boat. What if it's a bicycle? Or what if it's a motorcycle? What if, we're trying to right the ship, instead of stepping back and saying, okay, let's transition from sailing to pedaling. There's a book written about that called Canoeing the Mountains. And it's a great book. It's all about Lois and Clark's expedition. And they thought that they could canoe all the way to the Pacific Ocean. They thought they could use waterways. Mm-hmm. And they ran into this thing called the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
and so they thought that they could like put the canoes on and they really believed that they were going to like top the first crest and then see the ocean. And they got to their journals revealed that they got to the top of the first crest and it was just mountains, 10 to 14,000 foot peaks for as far as they could see. And they had to learn how to canoe the mountains. They had to learn how to adapt. So a lot of stuff in that little snippet with Sadell and riding the ship versus learning how to pedal a bike. I don't know. When I sit down like this with somebody like you, it excites me, and really gives me hope. Actually, I just really want to encourage you. Don't give up on the bride, man. We need you. We need you desperately. And that's not even trying to leverage you or lay it on thick. It's just the honest truth, What do you think about that?
I'd never thought of it that way. But I guess it's true that all institutions go under metamorphosis from time to time if they're going to last, especially, if you think about the 20 some odd 100 years that the church has been around, things have changed and will continue to change. I don't know if, in my opinion, I don't know if looking around and seeing I don't know. I think this is just me. You can disagree. I think if we look at where the church is headed, and if that's the transformation, I think we need to go back to being a ship. But there's definitely aspects of the church doesn't fit in modern society in its old form. Maybe who knows whether it's the church needs to change or society needs to change, or some combination of both. That's probably what's true. But I think if we return to the question about the men, I have more and more respect for my dad every day, just because I come home and I don't want to do anything. And for a very, very long time, he did a lot for us, and he continues to be active and involved in his church. And it's I guess it used to be lost on me. It's not now, and I'm sure it'll continue. The magnitude of the effort it takes will continue to grow as I get older. But the amount of effort that took is amazing. And right now I don't do that. I don't want to do that. But and I don't know how we get people to want to do that.
Men.
Yeah, men. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a cop. It's not a cop out. Like, people are busy. They work and they've got kids and this and that, and the pie gets eaten up with things that aren't church. And I don't know. Women seem to have it figured out. They show up to church, and they have just as much, if not more, responsibility in a lot of families. And I don't know. It's weird. I don't know how we figure that out.
So they desperately desire for their kids and grandkids to be raised in the Christian faith. And most dads desperately desire for their kids and grandkids to learn how to hit a baseball or throw a football or shoot a buck, or and all of those things are not bad. I think it's just focus and motive and intention. A lot of men view the church as feminine, as soft, and a big, hard, tough man going in the way of Jesus and denying himself and trying love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and all of those things. It's a hard sell, dude. It has been for millennium, and it will be, and that's where I think the authenticity and relationship with guys like you and Stephen and Zachary. We have to have Zachary on. That would be.
Oh, you should.
To get Zachary on, that would be.
No, he's great.
That would be a very entertaining. Very entertaining. Maybe we do a round table with a bunch of y'all
awesome.
on. But anyway, that in my opinion, that's where the relational piece comes in. Is modeling, just living life, doing life. It is the Annapolis midnight truck rides, but it's so much more than that too. It's that consistent modeling that then wins some. So let me ask this, and you can unpack it as much as you are comfortable or not. So as a professing Christian, sincere in your convictions, and living from that place, not connected to a local church, not connected to a local church, like how do you practice your faith? Like what are your rhythms? What are your habits kind of on your island? How do you go about practicing your beliefs?
Well, I'll answer that. That's a good question. I think something in this most recent season of life I've been in, I don't know, maybe you know this, maybe you don't. My grandmother passed away a couple months ago from cancer. And, you know, that's you get 85 good years in life, and that's something to be thankful for. But one thing that did impress me, or maybe impressed is the wrong word, one thing that amazed me was how a person's life can be reduced down to an hour of a eulogy and some songs, and you know that's kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking about that a lot for months and months and months now. For I guess 3 or 4 months now, not many months, but that's been banging around my head. And then this idea that we know God's timing is perfect. I'm incredibly grateful that He's decided not to come back today or tomorrow or the next week. Because then I'll have to sit there and explain, hey, you know, why'd you bail on the church? And you know, that's something that I think we both agree is indefensible. And so I've been thinking about that. Those two things, right? Like, what's your legacy look like? How do you have a legacy in such a brief time on earth? And how do we make that mesh with what God, you know, desires for us? I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's sort of the big philosophical things that have been running around my head the last couple months. And I guess to exercise my faith during the whole time, I read my Bible more than I ever have.
Amen, man.
It's weird, you know. I don't know why. It's very strange. I'm fascinated by the history of it at this point, and I think my brother, and maybe you too, beat me to the whole different translations and the Strong's Concordance and all that good stuff. But there's a lot of intricacies in the Bible that keep me coming back to it. You know, I'm going through Daniel right now. It's a lot more than you know, some guys get almost eaten by a lion and tossed into a furnace. There's more to it than that. There's more to Jonah than a guy that gets swallowed by a whale. And so really, it's funny. I've been reading, I guess, the kids' stories, and they all look different now. And I'd love to go back and you know, you run into, was it Balaam with his donkey, and all these characters who are so relatable to me. I find that amazing, and I don't know that just reading the Bible is worship, but it's definitely a form of connection. I don't pray as much as I should, but I do. I don't know, man. Yeah, I feel further away, maybe, from Christians. I don't know that I really feel further away from God. Now you can probably argue that God and Jesus would be like, hey, what the heck, man? Why are you sitting on your island? You know, it's kind of selfish and not what we want you to do, man. And that's true. But just, I guess, where I'm at right now, I'm very inward. Everything's focusing inward.
Which you're naturally hardwired that way. I mean, as long as I've ever known you, I mean, that's how God made you. That's not anything to apologize or that's you. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I would say that study is a form of worship. So if we address worship, if we come at worship as a posture, which I am convinced worship is a posture, to sit with the text. So there's reading the text for leisure, right? And just because it's relaxing and enjoyable. And then there's studying. And as we study and partner with the Spirit of God in that, there is this posture. And the text, is that mirror. And there's times where we read, we see parts and pieces of ourselves in a donkey, or there's times where we see parts and pieces of ourselves in the man that's on the donkey, or in the fish, or the man that's in the fish, or in the furnace, or the man that put the guys in the furnace. All of those things are beautiful in the Word of God. It is a breathing, moving, living organism. I would argue that reading the text, studying the Bible is absolutely a form of worship.
One of these churches I visited. I went to. I even went so far as I went to Sunday school with a buddy.
Okay.
And so the guy, that was fun. It was good. And afterwards we were talking. The preacher came up and we made small talk. He was like, "Hey, what's your favorite book in the Bible?" And maybe you know what I said. Maybe you don't. These days it's Jonah, because I think we're all like Jonah, even though we don't want to be. Mm-hmm. And he thought that was kind of the strangest thing in the world. So that's another experience, and we can talk more about that maybe off some other time. But I do think that there's a lot to the Bible that the modern church misses or doesn't want to go into, because it requires you to sit and digest some things that are hard or difficult to even broach the topic, and then much less to hold the mirror up. But yeah, I mean it's good and well to study. But I think that we've probably talked about this before too. The idea of walking with God. Like when they say someone walked with God. I think a lot of times we as Christians maybe don't appreciate that language enough. It's good. It's really good. Especially, I find myself, I do fish a lot these days, especially over the winter. We fish for trout. There's a delayed harvest section of the Chattahoochee River when it gets cold. And I think you did this too. I find myself thinking about God a lot doing that. And on the water for different reasons. I think about God. I find myself, looking at cloud and thinking about God, and reading leisurely the Bible, just because sometimes I do like the story of the guy that gets swallowed by the fish. I think those are all good things too that nobody talks about. That there's a lot of people, I think, that commune with the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost and outside of church, and somehow you just got to capture that and bring it in the doors with you. I think church has people expecting, I think it's very zero sum. I think people bring in that their spirit and their atmosphere, that all comes into the church. It doesn't, I don't know that you don't get filled up in the church and take it with you like everybody says. I think you bring it with you, and it might get multiplied, but I think you got to approach it the right way, and I think a lot of churches don't, and that's probably what I've struggled with the most. Is I don't see it, and I think we could argue that you got to go more than once or twice or three times. You got to give it months, and you'll start to see it. But that's big. I think it's huge that we get people worshiping outside of church in their day-to-day to walk with God. I wish I could have heard somebody preach on that. I don't know that I ever have.
So one of the things that I heard you say was that you wish churches would approach things the right way, and so many churches don't. And I am not trying to put you on the spot or poke holes in you at all. Don't take that this way. What is the right way? Like, in your opinion, what is wrong? I think people your age and my age, listen, it's easy to say kids these days, but equally we should say adults these days. Like, I think whoever may listen to this, no matter what demographic they fall into, need to hear from people your age what is right with the church, what is wrong with the church. Can we talk about that a little?
Yeah, I think one thing I don't see enough of that I think is probably more conviction of people in my age group. I don't see the church fulfilling the role of the church in its community. You know, I see a lot less. I see a lot less food banks and clothes closets and cookouts than I feel like I used to.
Okay.
And I see a lot more of churches going, oh, you know, if we can just give us some more money and we'll you know, you'll be blessed, and you know, we'll be able to expand our worship space, which is fine and good. I just, the way I'm hardwired, and the way I think a lot of people are hardwired, they just don't know it, is the reward doesn't come from the bigger the lights and the sounds and the expanded seating capacity, which if you need it, I guess is fine. But I would really love to see the church being the church, and feeding hungry people, and giving clothes to people who don't have any, and giving shelter to homeless people, you know, and maybe that's, I think I mean that literally too. People talk, and you know, you can get into whole political discussion about, oh, you know, we need support from the government and whatnot, but there's a lot of roles that the church historically fulfilled that it doesn't anymore. And they need to get back to it.
I hear that a lot from the younger generation, is like they want to see application. Like, no theory. Theory's fine. But and that's in your generation, and the one beneath you that's even more pronounced. Action. Like, I'll join a cause. If we're gonna go do something, count me in. If you're going to sit around and talk about it, it depends on the communicator and the atmosphere. But when you get ready to go do something with it, let me know.
Now, on the other hand, I do know a lot of people in my cohort, and even me to a pretty significant degree, who like to talk about things and like to do things. And sometimes when the going gets, you know, the rubber hits the road, all those people who say, yeah, we should go be involved, they find themselves in other places come Saturday morning or Sunday night. So I think there's two sides to that coin. You know, the church needs to do more, and people that want the church to do more need to do more.
Yeah, it's hard to do more when you don't have the volunteers. You know, the 80-20 rule or the 20-80 rule. And it doesn't matter what your church's size is. It doesn't matter where it's located. 20%'s toting 80% of the mail, and you knew this growing up. Even in our context, there, when you looked up, at the end of the day, it was going to be the same 30 to 40 people pulling everything off. Didn't matter what it was: children's event, youth event, adult event, retreat, outreach, missions, evangelism. It was going to be the same 30 to 40 people, almost everything. And my lived experience is that's pretty common across the board. But yeah, I think that's good for folks to hear. What else? What do you think's right? What do you think's wrong? What would it take? What would for you to walk in and be like, oh my gosh, I found my place? What is it that you're looking for?
That's a good question. I think I think a lot of churches, what they do correctly, at least relative to my memory of church as a kid, I think they're a lot more willing to at least hit the surface on maybe difficult conversations, societally and religiously. Maybe that's kind of how the church has changed. Like sermon styles have changed. Or maybe I never paid attention as a kid because it wasn't directed at me. But I do think churches they do a decent job of setting a table sometimes for conversations. Now, are the conversations followed up? No, maybe not. But I do think, especially if you consider the tumult of the last decade or decade and a half in the United States, I think that there are a lot of churches that have done a good job facilitating or trying to facilitate conversations. So, good job.
Yeah.
No, and I mean that seriously. It's a good thing. But I don't know. I haven't been in one where I've felt where someone could say something maybe unpopular and not really get looked at funny or something like that. And I don't just mean that on like, I guess I think the last one maybe we talked about before you moved to Missouri. Maybe George Floyd had just been killed or something along those lines, and I think we spoke a little bit about the role of the church with regard to really racial relations and if anything, I think it just that sort of thing, those sorts of dynamics have been sort of reverberating the last 4 or 5 years since then, along with many others. And there are churches that do a good job of trying to bring people together. I don't know. It takes a lot of guts to do that. And they do a good job.
Yeah, that when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, because it was right there on the Georgia coast.
Extend an open hand or be understanding.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It had hung up on my end. I thought you were done with the. It was when Ahmaud Arbery was killed there off the Georgia coast that really, you had George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and then Ahmaud Arbery, and that was so close to home, man. And we were rocked. And, relatively speaking, our student ministries were pretty diverse as compared to others around. And that, I remember our conversations. I remember navigating, coming to a table with no answers and all questions. And learning to listen. And being treated with dignity and grace and allowed to ask some questions, and I think that there's certainly room for those spaces and times and tables. On the flip side of that, I've seen a lot of pulpits used as battering rams for specific agendas or political stances and that type thing, and which is a whole nother conversation. But is the church flawed? Yes. Is the church perfect? No. But I think that she is still God's way of intentionally making a change in the world. I still, as tempting as it is at times to put your hands in there and walk away and go live in a cabin in the hills somewhere and grow a beard out to your belly button, I think that the work of the church is still worth staying in the trenches over, even on the days that are maddening. You know. Cool, dude. So I end every episode, most every episode when I remember, by asking people how do they keep things simple. The name of the podcast is the Keep It Simple podcast. You're a pretty simple dude, always have been. How do you keep things simple?
So I read this question when we sent our meeting notes and thought immediately, so I got my wallet here. I've carried this around since I was in high school. It's survived pretty well, actually. But on a little note card from the youth room, we have St. Francis' prayer that I think you've heard. Specifically the second verse or stanza there, and it says, "O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love."
Amen,
I think
man.
if you want to talk about simplifying and making things simple, that right there, a pretty simple way to start.
Awesome. Matt, thank you. It's so hard to call you Matt. To me, you'll always be Matthew, but you're grown up and bearded Matt. I am Matt. Hear me roar. Dude, thanks for the time. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for the vulnerability and the transparency and the authenticity. Your gift, and I really, really appreciate you.